So with the different classifications of descriptive research, we are now ready to proceed to one of the main classifications or types of descriptive research, which is the survey research. So the survey research, the survey research is actually the simplest kind of quantitative research. It is the simplest one. And its purpose is to widely explain the characteristics of a particular group or a bunch of population. So it aims to explain or describe. So it aims to explain or describe characteristics of a particular, let's say, group or population. So that is survey research. And survey research typically uses sampling methods. It typically uses sampling methods. So as a method of quantitative research, we all know that sampling methods uses samples derived from a population. So they use sampling methods. Another method survey research use is, of course, the use of surveys and questionnaires. It uses surveys and questionnaires. And also, since it utilizes sampling methods, meaning to say it also utilizes the use of inferential analysis. However, it is not broad. So it uses simple inferential analysis. To analyze quantitative data. So since survey research makes use of surveys and questionnaires, meaning to say survey researches relies on the different levels of measurement. Survey research relies on the different levels of measurements. So to reiterate once more, what are the levels of measurements? So we have four. We have the nominal scale, the ordinal scale, the interval scale, and the ratio scale. So the nominal scale makes use of names. In the ordinal scale, it makes use of names that are arranged in a sequence or order. Next is we have the interval scale, which uses artificial zero, meaning to say the values or the quantitative values can be in a negative form, while ratio scale makes use of values with absolute zero, meaning to say the starting point is zero. The numbers cannot be negative and the distances have meanings. So it relies on the different levels of measurement. And the data collected from surveys, since it uses surveys and questionnaires, the data collected from surveys and questionnaires are actually statistically analyzed. They are statistically analyzed. That's why it uses simple inferential analysis. They are statistically analyzed. And why they are statistically analyzed? Of course, they are statistically analyzed to derive or to draw meaningful conclusions, which are factual or based from the data. So, meaning to say, the data are statistically analyzed to prevent fictitious data, to prevent false data or fiction data. So, that is survey research. Also, survey research are commonly employed to gather quick information. So, it is commonly employed to gather quick information about common trends. So, information about common trends. Common trends, or let's say common topics, or common ideas. So, that is why survey research is widely used in market research. Okay, in the field of business. It is widely used in market research. So, when we say market research, these are the researches employed by markets to, let's say, to enhance their products, something like that. So, for example, a certain market launched a new product, and then the market wants to know the feedback of the customers about that product. So, they will conduct survey research. So, they can gather quick information about the trend or the, let's say, the product they released. Okay? So, that is survey research. So, since survey research makes use of surveys and questionnaires, okay, let us try to give examples of the different components of, let's say, different components of the surveys used in survey researches. So, let us have some components of questionnaires. So, some components of questionnaires, meaning to say, these are the common things, or the common, let's say, yes, the common methods, or the common content of the questionnaires, of the surveys. So, the common contents. So, let us have first this one. One of the most common content in survey researches, or in the questionnaires of survey researches, is the use of the Likert scale. Okay? The use of the Likert scale. So, the Likert scale looks like this. Okay? So, let's say we have the varying numbers. Number 4, 3, 2, and 1. And then, the number 4 has an interpretation of, let's say, very adequate. Okay? Then, the number 3, we have adequate. Number 2, we have inadequate. And number 1, we have very inadequate. Though, these values may vary. Another one, or let's say, another interpretation of number 4 can be, let's say, very satisfied. Very satisfied. Let's say, satisfied. Unsatisfied. And very unsatisfied. Okay? So, it is not limited to these. We can also have this one. We can have strongly agree. Okay? We can have agree. We can have disagree. And we can have strongly disagree. Okay? So, this may be familiar to you. Yeah, okay? Because the Likert scale is one of the common components of questionnaires. So, from this example of a Likert scale, what do we mean by the Likert scale? So, the Likert scale is a type of questionnaire. Okay? Likert scale is actually a type of questionnaire that measures what? The levels of agreement, okay, of the respondents towards certain issues or conditions. Okay? Okay? So that is the Likert scale. It is a type of questionnaire that measures the levels of agreement of the respondents towards certain issues or conditions. Okay? So, during our previous discussion, we said that surveys as a method in gathering data in quantitative research makes use of both the qualitative and quantitative values. And this actually pertains to the Likert scale. Okay? The Likert scale. Now, the Likert scale has two components. Okay? It has two components. So, we have the weights and the descriptive rating. Descriptive rating. So, meaning to say, these two components, okay, of Likert scale are actually these. So, these are the weights, the numbers, the quantitative. Then, these are the descriptive ratings, the qualitative. Okay? So, these are the two components. So, the weights are actually the numbers. And the descriptive rating are the wording of weights. So, they are the nominal. Okay, they are the, let's say, the names of the numbers. Okay? So, that is, or these are the two components of a Likert scale. Now, how does a Likert scale work? Okay, we know that this is the Likert scale, but how does it work in research? Do we just have to rate our level of agreement? Do we just have to check if we are very adequate, inadequate, etc., etc.? Okay. Now, I will try to explain to you how does the Likert scale works in an essence that it can be used in research. Okay, so let us have this one. So how does it work? For example, we have given this topic. So the topic, let's say, is how adequate. So this is the research topic. How adequate the facilities of SUC, Service Utility Center, okay, in region 4A, Calabarzon. Okay, so that is the research topic. This one is a question mark. Okay, this is the research topic. Now, let's say that we have 500 respondents. So we have a sample of 500 respondents. So why 500 respondents? Because we have 5 provinces in the Calabarzon region. We have Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, Rizal, and Quezon. So let's say we have 100 in Cavite, 100 from Laguna, 100 from Batangas, 100 from Rizal, and 100 from Quezon. So we have 500 different respondents from the different region because it comprises the Calabarzon region. Now, since we are concerned with how adequate the facilities of SUC in Region 4A in Calabarzon, we can use the Likert scale because it measures the level of agreement. Okay? And the level of agreement can be in a form of agreement, satisfaction, adequacy, etc., etc. So we can use the Likert scale. Now, let us first have the numbers. We have 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay? And what are the descriptive ratings for each? With 4 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. So, since we are talking about adequacy or adequation, we will use this descriptive rating, the first one. Okay? So, we have very adequate, adequate, inadequate, very inadequate. Okay? So, this is the, let's say, the Likert scale for this topic. Okay? So, this one here, the encircled in pink color, these are the weights. So the weights are signified by the letter X. Okay? They are signified by the letter X. Now, let us try to, let's say, distribute the respondents. So, for example, the respondents were given the questionnaire with the Likert scale. And this is the, let's say, the question in the Likert scale. How adequate the facilities of SUC in Region 4A Calabarzon? They were given this Likert scale with 4, 3, 2, 1, very adequate, adequate, inadequate, and very inadequate. Now, after the researchers gathered the 500 questionnaires from the different respondents, they counted the, let's say, they counted the frequency. Okay? Or they counted how many voted for very adequate, adequate, inadequate, and very inadequate. Okay? So, let's say 180 respondents from Calabarzon voted for very inadequate. 150 for adequate, 125 for inadequate, and 45 for very inadequate. So, these numerical values here, they are quantitative in nature and they will be known as the frequency, signified by the letter F. Okay? It uses frequency. Now, we all know that quantitative research is concerned with statistical methods. Okay? It uses statistics. However, how can we use statistics in the Likert scale? Given that they are given descriptive ratings and everything. Okay? So, it can use a statistical treatment known as the weighted mean. Okay? It uses a statistical treatment. Since survey research uses simple inferential analysis, it can use a statistical treatment known as the weighted mean. Okay? The weighted mean. And what is the formula for the weighted mean? So we have this one signifies weighted mean. Okay? And the weighted mean is equal to the summation of the frequency multiplied by the weights over the number of respondents or the population. So that is how we can get the weighted mean. So let us try to compute. Okay? So the summation. So let us have this one. 45, the frequency, times 1 plus 125 times 2. Then let's say we have this one, 150 times 3. Then we have 180 times 4. Okay, what is the number of respondents? We have 500. So we have 500. So we can compute it as 1,465 over 500. And the answer will be 2.93. Okay? It will be 2.93. So 2.93 is the weighted mean. Is the weighted mean. Okay. Now, does this 2.93 is our final answer? No, because we cannot interpret it. Okay, we cannot interpret the 2.93 value. Now, how can we interpret the 2.93 value? So, to interpret this value of 2.93, we will have a separate solution. Okay? So, we have that, the weighted mean. So, let us try to interpret. Okay, we got a weighted mean of 2.93. Now, how to interpret? Okay, how to interpret? Meaning to say, if we interpret, we try to describe this number given by our respondents. So how to interpret? Okay, first, we have to find the value of range. Finding the value of range. So what is the formula for the value of range? Range is equals to the highest score minus the lowest score. Okay? So what do you mean by score? The score are actually the weights. So what is the highest weight? The highest weight is 4. The lowest weight is 1. Therefore, our range is 3. Next, we find the... So after we find the range, we next have to find the class interval. So class interval is denoted as CI. Okay? So what is the formula for class interval? So class interval is derived with the formula of range over the highest weight or highest score minus 0.01. So 0.01 is actually a constant value or constant term. Why? Because 0.01 is the margin of error. Margin of error. Okay? So after we find the range, we next have to find the class interval. Okay? So let's try to solve it. So we have the range. The range is 3. So CI is equals to 3 over the highest weight of 4 minus 0.01. So 3/4 is 0.75, then minus 0.01. So the class interval is 0.74. Okay? So after we find the class interval, we must next create a table, or let's say formulate a table. So this is where the demographics comes in. Okay? We create a table. So we have the range interval for the first column, and then we have the descriptive rating for the second column. Descriptive rating. Okay? So we have this. Okay. Now, in creating a table of range intervals, we must start from the lowest score. Okay? So we start from the very bottom. Okay? So let's have 1.00. So 1.00 plus 0.74 is 1.74. So 1.00 to 1.74. This is the first range interval. Then the second will start at 1.75. Then let us add a value. So 2.49. Then we have 2.50. Then to 3.24. Then we have 3.25 to 4.00. Then the descriptive rating will be based on the descriptive rating we used. So what was the descriptive rating we used? We have very adequate, adequate, inadequate, and very inadequate. So we will use this as well. So the descriptive rating for 1 to 1.74 is very inadequate. Okay, 1.75 to 2.49 we have inadequate. So we have 2.50 to 3.24 we have adequate. And lastly, 3.25 to 4 we have very adequate. Okay. So with this, let's say range and class intervals, we can now interpret the meaning of this weighted mean. So what was the weighted mean once more? The weighted mean we got was 2.93. So this one, 2.93. So in what range interval 2.93 comes in? So obviously it is in the range of 2.50 to 3.24. So this is where 2.93 comes in. So meaning to say, since the range of the weighted mean is in the range interval of 2.50 to 3.24, our descriptive rating will be adequate. Okay? So, after that, after we interpreted, okay? After we analyzed and interpreted the weighted mean, generalization will be formulated. And this generalization or conclusion will apply to the whole population. Okay, so what was the population we have? So the samples, we have 500. So we have a population sample of 500. Okay, so the generalization will apply to these 500 respondents. Okay, so what will be our generalization or our conclusion? So the generalization will be the facilities of SUC, okay, in Region 4A Calabarzon are concluded to have adequate level. Okay? So, that will be our conclusion for the topic, how adequate the facilities of SUC in Region 4A Calabarzon. Okay, and our generalization based on the surveys from the Likert scale and from the interpretation of the Likert scale, we got this conclusion. Okay, so that is one of some components of the questionnaire. So one component of the questionnaire is the Likert scale. Okay, so with that, we will proceed to the next or another component of a questionnaire. So another component of a questionnaire, okay, or another, let's say, method of giving a survey, okay, of conducting surveys, is the method or the component of the yes and no questionnaires. Okay, so this is another component of a questionnaire, the yes and no questionnaires, okay, or the yes and no questions. So from the name itself, yes and no questionnaire, it is a type of questionnaire which employs, okay, it employs questions for the respondents okay, that can be answered only by yes and no. Okay? And since the yes and no questionnaires is, let's say, the data or the quantitative data of the yes and no questionnaires concerned with the frequency, it can also use, this is the statistical treatment of weighted mean. Okay? It can use the weighted mean. So, example of a yes or no questionnaire. So, let us have example. So, still pertaining to the topic, how adequate the SUC are in the Calabarzon region. So, let's say we have a question that states that are the personnel responsive to queries? Okay, then there will be a checkbox here pertaining to yes or no. Okay, so let's say yes, something like that. Then after they gathered the data, after they gathered the number of yeses and the number of nos, okay, so let us have, let's say, the number of yes and the number of no. So the weights of yes and no, since yes has the higher value, it will be weighted as 2 and no will be weighted as 1. Then after that, we will find how many respondents answered yes and how many respondents answered no. So let's say out of the 500 respondents, there are let's say 410 who said yes and 90 who said no for this question alone. Okay? Then we will try to get the weighted mean. So that's how yes and no questions or yes and no questionnaires work. Okay? So since we are pertaining to the questionnaires, okay, the components of questionnaires, of course, components of questionnaires are not complete without questions themselves. So another component of questionnaires are questions. Okay? So questions actually have two types. Okay? So there are two types of questions in a questionnaire. And what are those? So the first type of questions in a questionnaire will be known as the open-ended questions. Okay? It will be known as the open-ended questions. So what are open-ended questions? Okay? So open-ended questions, so let's just give an example. Okay? So let's say we have a question here. The question here is, do you feel any side effects while using the product? Then it will be checked by yes or no. Then after that, there is another question here. Okay? If there is any, what is it? Then there will be a blank here. Okay? So, based from our example, what are open-ended questions? So, open-ended questions employ the use of yes and no questionnaires. However, these yes and no questionnaires are followed by what? They are followed by reasons or another answer that is not answerable by yes and no. Okay? So, open-ended questions. These are questions who use the yes and no questionnaire, and it is followed by another question that is answerable using reasons or other answers. Okay? So that is, or those are open-ended questions. Next. So if we have open-ended questions, we have close-ended questions. Okay? Close-ended questions. So what are close-ended questions? So close-ended questions, these are questions that has options as well, like the open-ended questions. They have options as well. But let's say the difference between open-ended and close-ended questions is that close-ended questions do not use, okay, it do not use follow-up questions. There are no follow-up questions in close-ended questions. And what are the types of questions that can fall under close-ended questions? We have, let's say, yes and no questionnaires. Because there are some questions that are answerable by yes and no alone. There are no need, or there are no need for reasons at all. Okay? Another one is a, let's say, multiple choice type. Okay? Multiple choice type questions. Okay? And lastly, we have the scale questions. So what are scale questions? Scale questions are those, for example, in a ranking of 1 to 10, rank the following factors based on your, let's say, preference, with 1 being the highest and 4 being the lowest, something like that. So those are scale questions. Okay, so scale questions is also known as ranking. Okay, it is a question where you rank certain variables. Okay? So these are the different components of a questionnaire used in survey researches. So in our next video, we will be discussing some more, let's say, components of survey research. Specifically, the methods in obtaining data in survey research, and of course, the two types. Okay, the two types of survey research.